Aloha, everybody. On this episode of Faith and Family First, Jim Hochberg and I are going to be talking about abortion in Hawaii and how it really started and how does it affect our Constitution. So stay tuned for that. Hello, Jim.
Hello, Eva Andrade.
How are you doing? Have you recovered since being at the Capitol for all the crazy issues that we've been tracking?
I think so.
Are you? Are you ready for the next round? Because people are listening to this. Crossover has taken place, and now we're going to be facing all of those bills all over again in the new chamber.
Well, I have been spending a lot of time at my gun club shooting because I am in the process of applying for a concealed carry permit. So I've been really busy.
I know you have. And I think, Jim, we need to totally do another show on what's happening with a lot of those gun bills because you've had some interesting experiences down at the Capitol. But we'll leave our listeners and viewers hanging. We will not get into it now. They'll have to stay tuned, and we'll have to do that later. But so, Jim, on the show today, what I really want to do is I want to get people to take a step back from SB1, which is the bill we've been talking about, to kind of understand really our Constitution here in Hawaii and what abortion has to do with the Hawaii state constitution. And then maybe towards the end of the show, we can jump into what SB1 is trying to accomplish by that. So
Sure.
I thought we would go back in time to something that you like to talk about. Every once in a while, you've brought it up on the show, but I've never given you a
Voting.
platform to talk.
Voting?
Ding!
Yeah.
Ding! All right.
Who you vote for?
Brah. Okay.
All right.
So here's the thing. Every once in a while, you kind of just throw this out there, and then I've never kind of given you a platform to talk about it. So I think that why don't you tell us about the wonderful constitutional convention that Hawaii had in 78?
Oh, yeah, the last one that we had.
Yes. Okay. So, but before that, as we just to throw it out there, Hawaii legalized abortion in March of 1970. So we were ahead of all the other states. Abortion's legalized, but you fast forward to the Constitutional Convention and...
So there's some context.
Yes, exactly.
So when Hawaii became a state, instead of allowing the people the right to put ballot measures on the ballot, to amend the Constitution, create laws, repeal elected people from office, we don't have any of those rights on the state level. A lot of states do, like California, proposition this, that, and the other. It's the people getting signatures to put a law up to the vote of the people instead of the legislators. Well, instead of giving us that, what they gave us in 1959 in the state constitution is every 10 years on the 8th year, we get asked, it must be on the 6th year, we get asked, do we want to have a constitutional convention? And if the question is voted yes by more people than not, then the next year we have a constitutional convention. Well, in 68, we had one. It was a minor detail. In 78, we had one, and we haven't had one since. Very interesting.
And there was tons of stuff on
what came out in 78 was the creation of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, the creation in the Constitution of the private and public employee right to collective bargaining.
Collective bargaining,
and
yes.
those two political interest groups, in my opinion, has successfully convinced the voters to vote no because they're very powerful and they don't want their power to be diluted through a new amendment that might change that stuff, right? Well, what also got put in was a specific express right to privacy. But I'll tell you something you might not know. I was a UH student, and I was barely 21 years old, and I actually ran for the ConCon to be a delegate.
I did know that. Yes, I did.
But I failed miserably. I got like less than 100 votes, and the guy that won got like 3,000 votes. But he had just retired as a Democrat legislator in that same district. So he wiped everybody out.
Well, I think it's interesting the point you made that, they tried to lobby to get people not to allow another constitutional convention, right?
Well, they spent millions on TV
Well, I
commercials,
know,
radio,
but
all
what's
that stuff.
interesting though
Mailers.
is when you look at the history of the constitutional questions that do end up on the ballots, most of the time they pass, right?
Right.
I mean, people just tend to vote yes, yes,
Correct.
yes, yes, yes. But I find it very interesting because any changes to Hawaii's constitution or even the U.S. Constitution, but we're focusing on Hawaii's constitution. It's not a matter of the legislature just meets and they make changes and it becomes law. This is something that a question has to go to the legislators. The legislators have to pass whatever the question is going to be, but it has to go to the people. So any changes to the Constitution ends up in the laps of Hawaii residents. They decide whether this change is something. And that includes any repeals, right? Because people will say, well, we don't like that in the Constitution, so let's get it out.
Like the First Amendment.
Right. You know what I'm saying? So it cracks me up because, again, that's why we wanted to have the conversation today, is to get people to understand the process, because it's not just as easy if something bad is in the Constitution, we'll take it out. I mean, you can take it out, but it would have to go through the legislature first. It would have to end up as a question to the people, and then they'd have to say repeal or not, right?
So I want to talk a little bit about what's in the right to privacy from 1978 Constitutional Convention.
People hear that all the time when you're talking about abortion. Right to privacy is normally
the Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton said by only 5-4, it was a one-vote majority opinion. They basically said, and this really cracks me up because I had never heard some of these words before, but the right to privacy, which is not in the U.S. Constitution, the right to privacy is inherent in the 10 Amendments, and it flows from the penumbra of
your
these.
penumbra
I mean,
word.
it's like,
We did
what
this,
are they
yes.
talking about? Well, anyway.
You have to
so
go and
what
find
that means
find
is,
that old show, people, where Jim goes into the penumbra. Yes.
It's like, the light that you see from the sun when the sun is covered by a cloud. So you don't really see the light from the sun, but you see the reflection of the light behind the cloud. That's a penumbra. And so that's where the right to privacy is in the U.S. Constitution for purposes of abortion rights. Up until this past year, 2022, in June, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the Dobbs case that the 14th Amendment cannot be used to find constitutional rights unless it's part of the history and tradition in the Revolutionary War, the founding era, when the first 10 amendments were created and the Constitution was adopted, or the Civil War era, because that's when the 14th and 15th Amendments were created, adopted about slavery and due process, and made the Constitution of the United States binding on the states. People don't realize before the 14th and 15th Amendment, you didn't have the right to sue for constitutional deprivations in your state court because the states weren't bound to abide by it. It only applied to the federal court. So what does the right to privacy say? Because Supreme Court in 1973 said there's a penumbra of emanations and all this stuff. So what Hawaii did in 1978, this right to privacy was all about abortion rights.
Right.
And it's very clear from the Constitutional Convention documentation.
Although to be fair, it's been used in other
a lot.
But
it was because of abortion in
issue.
1978.
Yes.
And in 1978, they said the right of the people to privacy is recognized and shall not be infringed without the showing of a compelling state interest. The legislature shall take affirmative steps to implement this right, which is none of the other constitutional provisions have that order that the legislature shall do something next. Usually they do, but it's just kind of odd to have that in there. And so this right to privacy in Hawaii has come up in a lot of different contexts since 1978. Some of them it's been approved, some it hasn't. But here's the interesting thing. The compelling state interest requirement in order to infringe the right to privacy says that if the government wants to punish somebody in Hawaii, and that person that's being punished raises the right to privacy in their defense, in order for the state to succeed in punishing in violation of the right to privacy. And that comes up like in pornography and prostitution, drug testing, all that kind of stuff. The government has to prove that they are using the least restrictive means to accomplish a compelling state interest, which usually the state never wins that test because it's just too hard, which is the test from Roe. And that's why all the cases after Roe have always said you can't put an undue burden on the woman's right to an abortion. Well, that's the same test that now applies in Second Amendment cases, which is why the legislature this year has 42 bills regulating gun use because of the Bruin case, also this past June out of the U.S. Supreme Court. So basically, we're looking at the right to privacy because the legislature is throwing out a constitutional amendment on abortion this year for us to vote on when it passes. I'm guessing it's going to pass. But anyway, that's kind of the context that we want to look at this right to privacy.
Now,
thing.
how does the overturning of Roe and the Dobbs decision, how does that affect any right to privacy in any constitution? Or does it?
Well, all Dobbs said was under the United States Constitution, abortion is not a recognized right because it was wrongly decided in Roe and Doe and all those things. And the reason it was wrongly decided is abortion was never recognized in the history and tradition during the Revolutionary War or the Civil War eras. So it can't be a constitutional right. But the Supreme Court didn't make that up. Right after Roe was decided, conservative judicial scholars, constitutional scholars were saying that very same thing.
Right.
This isn't a legal opinion.
Right.
This is a political opinion. And so it just took 50 years for the Supreme Court to have a majority that could say, yeah, it was wrong from the very beginning.
Now, what's fascinating is, so I pulled up the election results because I wanted to
Which
see
year?
for 1978 for this constitutional question because I was curious to see what the balance would have been. And so now, mind you, there were several constitutional amendment questions on the ballot. Every single one of them passed. Okay, so it was across the board. Yes. So on this particular question, it was the third question. So back, if anybody wants to go do some fun research, they can look for Amendment 3 and find out if there was any. I didn't have time to do it because I wanted to see what the ads look like. Did anybody try to explain what a yes meant and what a no meant? Right.
Well, I wouldn't do that because I would rely on you to find the ads.
Well, I think, one of these days, maybe I will. Okay. So, but it was a very close vote, Jim. So it was 52.3% yes to a 47.9% no.
Well, by modern presidential election standards, that's a very wide margin.
Well, but you have to consider that Hawaii voting in that time there was a lot of people voting at that time. We had more successful people showing up I should say successful people. It was a successful drive. I mean, people were definitely doing it. So I thought that was interesting that it was, it definitely won. And again, we have to remind people that blank votes are considered no votes.
On a constitutional
amendment question.
Correct.
Okay, so we have abortion is legalized in Hawaii in March 1970. In the Constitutional Convention of 1978, they vote for the right to privacy to be added to Hawaii's Constitution. So now Hawaii's Constitution has the right to privacy enshrined in it. It's part of our Hawaii Constitution. Now, abortion in Hawaii, there have only been a couple of changes to abortion law. Now we're talking law, not constitution. Hawaii, when they established abortion in the early days, they said you had to be a resident. That was part of something that they said had to happen. And it had to be done by a doctor in a hospital. So that was kind of how they formulated the law in 1970. So you fast forward to 2006. Governor Linda Lingle is now in office, and Hawaii passed a Freedom of Choice Act. So basically what that did is they removed the residency requirement, and they made sure that now a woman's right to choose was not going to be infringed upon by any law. And so that passed overwhelmingly in 2006. So,
But we already had that law
but we
from
already had,
1970.
but it was to get rid of the residency requirement.
Because
and all
you
that.
couldn't get an abortion in Hawaii as a tourist.
Right. So, and that's, I mean, I guess that was a good way to.
California thinks it's a great idea. Come
Well-
to California as a tourist if you can't get an
Well,
abortion in
Jim,
Texas.
you were at that hearing when I was there when they said people are coming to Hawaii for that reason. I mean, I still think that I don't to think that Hawaii becomes a bastion for abortion. I mean, it's like the mantra back when abortion was legalized was safe, legal, and rare.
Rare.
Safe, legal, and rare. Now,
Meaning uncooked?
now today, it seems like the mantra is everybody all the time, and if you don't like it, too bad, pay for it.
So
That's what it seems
I
like.
want to go back to the future.
Okay.
In the 1800s and the 1700s, especially I think in Kailua Kona, babies were pounded on the heiau, I think, as sacrifices. They were born babies. They weren't unborn babies. And this is my understanding according to Life of the Land is Perpetuated in Righteousness,
yes.
that book. So assuming that's true, because I'm not that old. I'm Medicare, but I'm not that old.
Right. I don't know. You're
Hawaii's devotion to abortion is nothing new. There is spiritual warfare going on
Right.
through history.
Right.
And the same spiritual warfare that was going on when Captain Cook came is the same spiritual warfare that's going on now with respect to pro-life issues, abortion, physician-assisted suicide, how they treated the lepers, all that stuff. That's my point. I'm sticking to it.
Okay. Well, I want to go back to Act 35, which is what Governor Lingle signed, because I think that some of the stuff that happened then, it's tying into the changes that they're now trying to make moving forward to SB1 and today. Okay. So I know Jim just absolutely loves these introductions to these bills, right? So this was Act 35, and it was in April 26, 2006, that was signed by Governor Lingle. And for those that want to do research, it was HB 1242 HD1 that she actually signed into law. And so it says in Article 1, Section 6 of the Hawaii State Constitution includes an explicit right to privacy. And these are the words that it says. The right of the people to privacy is recognized and shall not be infringed without the showing of a compelling state interest. The legislature shall take affirmative steps to implement this right. And that's what you were. Then it goes on to say, to make clear that the right to reproductive choice is protected as a fundamental right under the Hawaii Constitution. The Committee of the Whole explained during the 1978 Constitutional Convention that, quote, by amending the Constitution to include a separate and distinct privacy right, it is the intent of your committee to ensure that privacy is treated as a fundamental right for the purposes of constitutional analysis. This privacy concept encompasses the notion that in certain highly personal and intimate matters, the individual should be afforded freedom of choice, absent a compelling state interest.
But that same
I knew you were going to bring up the but. Yes.
That same right to privacy subsequently was offered by a defendant in a prostitution case, the John, and the court said you don't have a right to privacy to pay somebody for sex in your own house or in a private spot, not in the car or something, but in a private dwelling. So it's like they speak out of both sides of their mouth. They like privacy for some things, but not for others.
I know, and I think the thing is we're going to do a show. I want to put this teaser out there. Jim and I are going to do a show about another issue that I think that what happens is here in Hawaii, people think that we just go down to the legislature and if we all wave these signs and say no, and the bills just die because of public outcry. But the point is that so many of these things have been just chip away at the law, chip away at the law, chip away at the law. That we're at a place that it's very hard to say no because the building is already falling down, right? And when the building's falling down, that's really not the time to go there and go, gee, let's talk about the structure of this building, right? Because it's now falling down. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't fight. And in the next show, Jim and I are going to be talking about what it's like to face the giants. So make sure you stay tuned for the next show. But so going back to the issue of abortion, though, abortion here in Hawaii has always been treated by the overwhelming majority, although I would question majority, but I'm going to give it to them. I'm going to say that the majority supports abortion, right? The woman's access to these services. I'm curious as to why more people that are opposed to abortion have just, in my opinion, have just given up the fight. You know, it's like, well, we've already lost the battle. And in a sense, I see what they're saying. Right? I mean, we already have this stuff on law in the books, but why? Civil Beat did an article right after the Roe decision, or the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe. They came back and said nothing's going to change in Hawaii.
Yeah, we're already so pro-abortion, it didn't change a thing.
Absolutely. And yet, how many abortion bills have been put out this year because the legislature wants to make sure, double sure, triple sure, that reproductive freedom, because it's changed now, right? It used to be reproductive choice. Now it's reproductive freedom, and choice and freedom, when you're looking at the law, could be the difference between.
Well, okay, so why is the biggest provider of abortion services in the country, maybe the world, I don't know, so interested in helping teenagers transition from one sex that they're biologically born with into the other one? What does that have to do with abortion? I'm telling you, it's spiritual warfare.
Well, yes. And I think all of the listeners and viewers that support our position on this, especially our faith-based listeners, are going to be.
But I would like the executives at Planned Parenthood to type in here, why do you support transitioning genders?
It's choice. If you listen,
yeah, but it has nothing to do with the money that they get for abortions, or mammograms, supposedly, or
it is.
It has nothing to do with it.
I might make a few people mad when I say this, but Jim, I truly believe it is about the money. It is about the money.
Of course, it's about the money, and I want to hear them say that.
Yes, they're never going to say that. But I mean, you're watching, and you can do a search right now, and you can see these kids that are struggling right now.
I think God's calling.
God's calling. Hello, God. Yes, speak. Your servant is listening. But I think that what happens is so many kids today who are confused about themselves, right? If they go through a process, the process is expensive. Those pills, those hormone blockers and all this kind of stuff that they want to talk, they're not free. Well, it might be free to them, but that's because you and I are picking up the cost for it. And to me, it's like, what do they say? The root of all evil, right, is money.
The love of money, not money. The love of money. You got to read your Bible, girl.
Don't correct me. I don't want to be corrected. I have the freedom to do whatever I want. Okay, no, you're right. But the point is that if you follow the money, you're going to go right to the source of the evil. And that's really what we're facing here in Hawaii. So fast forward now. So now we have the freedom of choice. So abortion's passed. Constitution Amendment adds right to privacy. Linda Lingle gets rid of the residency requirement and then makes sure that your freedom, your reproductive freedom is not infringed upon in any way, shape, or form. And now what they're trying to do in SB1 is dun, 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 dun,
So this is interesting. Somebody sent me SB 1167 SD1, individual reproductive rights. It's not SB1. What happened to SB1? This is SB 1167. It's also
You're not looking at SD1 then. You're looking at the original bill. That's SD1.
But not. It's SB 1167, not SB1. This is not SB1.
No, because that's the constitutional question bill. That's why.
That was SB1.
No, Jim. SB1 started off as punishing abortion providers and allowing physician assistants to do abortion. All of this stuff is now morphing.
All right. Anyway, yes. What does it say?
What does it say?
It's very interesting. So they want us, if this passes, to look at our ballot weeks in advance of the day you have to exercise your voting rights with the ballot. Please do not wait until the last minute because you need to understand this. We don't know that the language we're going to talk about today is the final language.
Right.
But they want to add to the Constitution a section that says no law shall be enacted nor any state action taken that denies or interferes with an individual's reproductive freedom in their most intimate decisions, which includes their fundamental right to choose to have an abortion and their fundamental right to choose or refuse contraceptives. So they change it a little bit in Section 2 when they say this is the question that will be printed on the ballot. It's not exactly the same. It says, shall the Constitution be amended to state that no law shall be enacted nor any state action taken that denies or interferes with an individual's reproductive freedom in their most intimate decisions, including the fundamental right to abortion and contraceptives.
And that was what I said to my board, and you're an attorney, so you can correct me. When you write the word including in there, you also have to assume that it's saying not limited to.
Well, you don't have to, but the problem in my testimony on SB 1 was it begs the question. If it's including this, these two, including what else? What else does it include? It's a terrible legal question.
Please, sir, can I have some more? I'm begging the question.
But here's the interesting thing. My testimony at the legislature also said, hey, guys, individuals don't get abortions. Pregnant people get abortions. All people aren't pregnant. Only the pregnant ones. There are individuals that have reproductive freedom who participated in getting the pregnant person pregnant. So what you're saying is the guy with the sperm now has a say in the reproductive freedom from his side. And I don't think that is anything that the state of Hawaii legislative liberals want to do.
Well, I think that your point that you made when you gave testimony also was a very strong one, saying that shall the Constitution be amended to state that no law shall be enacted, nor any state action taken that denies or interferes. Well, what happens to all the laws that are on the book that interferes with that right?
Yeah, it's implication.
Yeah.
It's repealed by implication.
So that's why it's like, okay, but what about that law that says that you have to be at least 14 to have an abortion? Well, what if
without parental consent?
Well, what if an 11-year-old gets pregnant now?
Right.
Are we infringing on their right reproductive freedom if the law says that you have to be 14?
Yep.
Okay, so these are the questions we want you to be thinking as we end the show today. So
your antenna needs to be up, watching for these constitutional amendment things coming out of the legislature.
Yes, and Jim and I are going to do a special show that we're going to talk about SB 1 in its current version because it has morphed, it has changed. And we will be watching SB 1167 with a hawk eye because they're going to change that as it moves through, and we'll keep you posted on that. So make sure you sign up to get alerts at hawaiifamilyforum.org. Like, share, subscribe, hit that notification button so that you'll always know whenever we upload a new video. And stay tuned, comment, and we will see you all next week. Mahalo, everybody.
Hey, become a sponsor of the show. Anyway, aloha.
What he said.